Meenakshi, can you start sharing your screen so we can see if that's all right? We're going to go now from a local bay in South Africa to broader, looking at the entire region and small island states, and looking forward to what Meenakshi has. Meenakshi, again with the others, I will give you the little peace sign of 2 minutes as soon as you reach your 8 minutes, and then you know you need to start wrapping up.
Sure.
But you ladies are doing well so far.
Can you see my screen? And does the Zoom box come in the way? Because I can see
all the Zoom boxes away. It's just your slides. Very nice and clear. You're 100%. You're 100% well. Anyone struggling to see her presentation? Seems like we're all good. Meenakshi, I'm going to start your time now. So floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm Meenakshi Poti, and today I'll be presenting our research on a systematic literature review of adaptive responses to environmental change in small islands in the Western Indian Ocean. Small islands are complex social ecological systems with multiple ecosystem services that support diverse livelihoods and human well-being. They are essentially large ocean states because of the high ratio of coastline to land, and also because of the large exclusive economic zones. They epitomize vulnerability and opportunity at both social and ecological levels. While they are heterogeneous in their geomorphology, their culture, the social backgrounds, etc., they also have shared histories, cultures, environmental challenges, and opportunities. They also present a wealth of knowledge on past, present, and future contexts for sustainable development. And this especially emphasizes the learning opportunity of these islands. They are perceived to be manageable because of their small land area, but this is not so simple, because they are in the front line of environmental change. And by this, we mean the change that is seen in a social ecological system caused by human influence or natural processes. And they affect societies and the environment at different spatial and temporal scales. Now, in islands, they are especially vulnerable to this change because of their high species endemism, the various combined anthropogenic pressures that act in the space, varying from invasive species, climate change, to larger developmental projects. While they also have future uncertainties and rapid land use change. So to address this, there are societal pathways or solutions seen as adaptive responses, which are actions proposed, planned, or implemented by different actors to address environmental change. They're aimed at reducing, preventing, or reverting the impacts, and they aim to develop an overall positive or desirable change, and to thus build its adaptive capacity. But now, with the complexity and uncertainty of environmental change, actors and institutions have to think creatively. So they have to think through adaptive thinking, knowledge sharing, and learning. The aim of this systematic review is to map the different responses in 9 small islands in the Western Indian Ocean. So we mainly look at what are the suggested and implemented adaptive responses, who is involved in these responses, and what are the characteristics of effectiveness. So these are the 9 small islands we focus on, which is Lakshadweep, Maldives, Republic of Mauritius, La Réunion, Seychelles, Mayotte, Comoros, Mafia Island, and Zanzibar. While they present a diversity of contexts, both in terms of their geography and political status, populations, etc. But this region is of specific importance because it's warming faster than other regions in the tropical oceans, and because of the rapid social and ecological changes that they face. Also, in terms of a review like this, there seems to be lesser research like that summarizes what's going on in comparison to the Pacific and the Caribbean islands. So this is the systematic literature review protocol we followed. We first looked at through the Web of Science, at literature between 2010 and 2020. So we first screened the articles in terms of the search terms, where we looked at the title, abstract, and keywords. And we got like more than 1,000 articles, after which we looked at the titles, and then I chose 567. Throughout all these processes, we used the exclusion criteria. And finally, we chose 329 articles after abstract and full text screening. And then I used content analysis to interpret the text of these articles. So as you can see in this figure, the distribution of articles varied quite a bit between these islands. So from 74 in Mauritius to only 4 in the Lakshadweep. In terms of categorizing the responses, we modified the framework suggested by Nobel et al. In 2014, where we categorized them into institutional, social, infrastructural, or ecological restoration-based responses. We found that there were a diversity of responses that were suggested or implemented, which were like 140 specific responses. These then were distributed across these different major categories, but often they would combine different responses together to make one adaptation strategy. So for example, if it was an early warning system, it could be both infrastructural, but also informational and also institutional. So there were many examples that overlapped across categories. And then under the institutional, which was the most cited kind of response, the examples include economic instruments like external donor funding, and laws and regulations like protected areas, government programs involving restoration or adaptation, planning and policies, and then community-based initiatives, which included participation or participatory research. I won't go through all of these examples because it would take a long time. But then social responses included educational responses like awareness raising, and informational responses that included knowledge integration or transfer. And then infrastructural responses had popular engineered responses like hard coastal protection structures, and then technology-based responses like recycling systems or renewable energy. Finally, ecological restoration-based responses were the least cited, although they are the most, they are gaining a lot of attention in terms of recommendations from authors. And this include like vegetation planting or for natural buffers, for example. In terms of the actors involved, there were different actors from different sectors, from governments to research, private sector, and media. The most cited, the most mentioned actor were government-related actors, and this reflects the need for coordination in governments, but also there were local communities and other actors like researchers and NGOs, which specifically were emphasized to have like facilitating roles in terms of exchanging knowledge between policymakers and local communities. External actors were mainly seen as were important players in terms of external donor funding, but also it's important to emphasize here that these funding instruments need to be more context specific and also involve more local voice. Finally, when it came to the effectiveness based on our thematic analysis, we found that the levers or barriers, which we now present as a desirable framework for effectiveness, looked at, in order for a response to be effective, they need to be rooted in the context of the place. So context involves from geography to the social characteristics like culture, gender roles, history, and the kind of relations they have with other countries, and also the ecology of the place. The context also shapes the other elements, which are resources, which come in terms of funding, but funding needs to be consistent and from diversified sources. And then time, so timely intervention and emphasis on long-term actions. And knowledge, which included access to knowledge, the integration of different knowledge types, anticipatory knowledge, and also specifically the training of local people in those response interventions. Because in some cases, there were maladaptive responses where a certain, like for example, an infrastructure-based response was set up, but then the people who were funding it or the pilot project that was led by, say, an external actor would leave without actually transferring the resources and the knowledge to the communities. And then the governance of responses in terms of coordinated actions that are adaptive and flexible, and also equitable and participatory. Finally, all of this is embedded in the iterative process of learning, which should always be part of the response itself. So constant monitoring and constant learning by both actors and institutions. And in terms of takeaways, this review has learning insights for both island and non-island settings. There is importance in learning from failures and maladaptive responses in order to not keep perpetuating the constant cycle of a certain response characteristics that might be maladaptive. And there is need to invest in long-term multi-pronged approaches that are adaptive as well. It's important to gain knowledge about the wider institutional setting. Although it takes time, it is definitely worth it before implementing a response. There's also need for more context-specific empirical research on response effectiveness, and then more research on traditional responses or community-based responses. And finally, there is definitely a space and a need for more collaboration at the regional level through learning networks like WIOGEN. And yeah, I would, these are some of the references I used. I went over the slides really fast, I apologize for it, but I didn't realize 10 minutes goes by super quickly. You can reach out to me and I'm happy to answer your questions now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I'll give you a round of applause as well. Thank you very much. Very interesting. Don't worry about going over time a little bit. This is why, yeah, the Q&A is going to be open to anyone who has any specific questions. But also, I encourage you, please, you've shared your presentation, you know, your contact details. Please also share that in the chat afterwards so people can follow up with you. I'm sure there's going to be lots of links. Joshina, she's got her hand up. She's also got her first question. Joshina, we've got a time for a quick question.
Yes, this congratulations. I wanted to know in terms of recommendations per.
I'm not sure I can hear Joshina actually.
Yeah, I thought it was my connection. I'm also Joshina. I'm not sure if your connection's great. Otherwise, feel free to chat. Put it in the chat box, or have we lost you? Okay, she's muted herself. It's not just me. I don't even know if it's a South African connection. Rebecca, you don't seem to be able to hear her either, hey? Okay. Joshina, if you can hear us, please feel free to share your question in the chat box. I think it might just be a technical glitch. Ah, Joshina's got it there.
Sure, thank you. I see a question also from Mona.
Yeah, you're welcome to take that one briefly.
Yeah, sure. So I didn't actually strictly categorize the drivers of environmental change because, but I did take a note in general of like what were the different drivers. So most studies looked at climate change, but it was difficult to isolate which main driver it was because some studies would talk about the interactive synergistic effects of different stressors together. So the main aim of the review was not to go through the different types of drivers itself, but to look at what the responses were.
Thanks. Thanks, Meenakshi.